Hey, I'm Kurt Indovina, and this is Remember When, the show about old stories in gaming history told with new perspectives. And today, we're talking about Halo, Microsoft's crowning franchise, a series that has changed console shooters forever and became the face of the Xbox brand. Except it almost didn't happen that way at all. Halo wasn't revealed to the world by Mr. Microsoft man himself, Bill Gates, but instead Steve Jobs. And it wasn't at E3 2001, but actually Macworld 1999. And it wasn't even supposed to be a first-person shooter. So considering that Halo is one of the most culturally impactful and successful video game franchises ever made, spawning dozens of books, toys, almost a movie, but definitely a TV show, 6 sequels and spin-off games, it's kind of wild to think that the Halo we know today may have been a whole lot different. Now, in order to unpack all this, we need to go back 29 years ago, where PC gaming was in a much different place. So I made a timeline, a very detailed, accurate timeline. If you're alive in the 90s like me, that's me here, and have any memory of playing games on a computer, there's a very high chance that it was on a Windows PC. But if your family had a Mac, well, this was a lonely place to be a gamer. And the absence of games was actually deliberate. In this issue of Computer Gaming World from 1990, it is cited that developers asked Apple for joystick support, which in response, an executive said, quote, "No, then people will think this is a game machine." So naturally, developers flocked to Windows, where there wasn't some sort of stigma about making and playing games. However, this left an untapped demographic for Mac users and a far less saturated place for games. And one studio was willing to try and still make games for Apple's non-gaming machine: Bungie.
Prior to joining Bungie, I had graduated from college as a graphic designer. At that time, we were exclusively working on Mac. There were very few games to play, especially multiplayer games. But there was this one that we played all the time, and that was Marathon, made by Bungie. And it was really a fantastic way to, connect designers from one studio to another and just kind of glued us all together in a way that excited me enough about the potential with the gaming industry.
Bungie was started in 1991 by 2 young college students, Alex Serapian and Jason Jones, and the team chose to focus solely on making Mac games just because it was less crowded than Windows. What followed was a couple games with some modest success, like Operation Desert Storm or Pathways to Darkness, but it was Marathon that was Bungie's big breakout success, or better known as Mac's answer to Doom.
At that time, Bungie was real small, so it was a very intimate kind of affair. But yeah, like Marathon and then Myth, I was so excited about this notion of what we could do with video games, and we would build games for the Mac, and they were going to be awesome.
Marathon's follow-up, Myth, equally proved to be a success, which gave Jason Jones the leeway to finally start working on his next big project, which he called Monkey Nuts? Was it actually codenamed Monkey Nuts at first?
Yes, it was in fact codenamed Monkey Nuts. It went through a few iterations as it went from stage to stage, and Monkey Nuts was one of them that, you could tell we were a real mature group of young guys in our 20s making games.
In some ways, if you take Marathon, an epic first-person shooter, and combine it with Myth's terrain-focused real-time strategy, you have the foundation for what initially was Halo. Yeah.
Our very first steps in developing the game, initially, the goal was to make it very similar to Myth, this sci-fi skinning of this new universe we were creating. God, I remember Jason and I working on building our first 3D characters. The first iteration of this little soldier character we called the Super Soldier. We began kind of fleshing out the very early foundation of the Halo universe. The very early stages of the Covenant and the Forerunners. At that time, the Forerunners were an actual physical entity on the battlefield as well. One of our programmers, Charlie, who is now the president of Bungie, he started programming in some physics for the Warthog, how it would drive over the terrain and jump over jumps, and it got so interesting to us. We were looking at the simulation as we were point and clicking these things around on the map, and we're saying, holy crap, this looks so interesting. Why aren't we controlling them ourselves and doing this ourselves? That would be far more fun, wouldn't it? And that's when we decided to pivot completely and start developing a third-person action game.
The game hadn't yet been fully realized. It didn't even have an official title, but it was already being considered Mac's killer app. And it got the attention of a certain turtleneck-wearing executive. Which brings us to the grand revealed Halo at Macworld.
We are starting to see some great games come back to the Mac, but this is one of the coolest I've ever seen. Halo is the name of this game, and we're going to see, for the first time, Halo. Welcome, Jason. Thanks, Steve. Yep. Everything you're about to see is being rendered in real time on a Macintosh.
I had been working on this game for about a year and a half or two. Our team was still small, around 10 people. We were pretty nervous about showing something off. But we were able to orchestrate a real simple narrative and have our early version of the Master Chief running around, our early versions of the Warthog and the Elites and Ghosts and Banshees and all these things flying through this beautiful open world with a colorful sky and the ring rising up into the horizon, and even delving into the Forerunner underground facility where there were holographic elements flying around. We were so excited about what we were creating, thinking it looked amazing at that time. And if I look at it now in retrospect, it looks like something that my children would be able to build, with guys like Joe and Jason to get up on stage with Steve Jobs to present our very earliest vision of Halo. Was just exhilarating for us as a studio.
Buzz began to grow around Halo, but behind closed curtains, and despite being a successful Mac developer, Bungie was actually struggling to keep the lights on. So how was Bungie in financial trouble? Well, it could be in part due to a very expensive, near $1 million recall of Myth 2, which contained a bug that wiped the user's computer if they uninstalled it. Prior internet updates and day one patches, Bungie had to get all the games back, make new discs, replace previous discs, and then send them back out. So in large part due to that very expensive PR mistake, Bungie started shopping itself around, seeking to be purchased. Enter Microsoft. Microsoft had its new sleek black plastic cinder block on the way and was in need for content, so Microsoft decided to pinch right from Steve Jobs' apple tree. And like that, Bungie uprooted, moved to Seattle, and was tasked with shifting gears on Halo yet again because Microsoft wanted a first-person shooter for its new console. And in the most cliche way imaginable, the rest really is history. It got sequels and spin-offs, sold millions upon millions of copies, and first-person shooters and consoles have never been the same since. But what if Halo never actually came out on the Xbox and was a Mac exclusive? Just for a moment, let's imagine a world as though Halo never revolutionized console shooters and instead came out the way it was initially intended. Would it have even been an FPS?
If we had just stayed on the Mac, we probably would have stayed within the Myth engine. We probably would have continued to develop this game as an open world until we figured out some of the pretty significant barriers of what that would have presented to us, and started scoping it back. It probably would have been a really cool game, but I'm not sure it would have had the outreach that we had given the move we made. It probably would have stayed third person, which would have changed the aiming mechanics, the overall feel of the design of the game in general. All of those core mechanics would have really been dramatically different. And so it's hard to imagine what it really could have turned into. Could you imagine the next iMac would just be this giant green helmet-like thing with an orange screen and a visor over it and to protect from the sunshine outside? And yeah, it probably there would have been weird things like that, I'm sure.
I mean, we did get tons of Halo-themed Xboxes, so it's not that far-fetched to assume that maybe Apple would do a themed iMac. I mean, who knows? Apple did release a video game console back in 1996, which was an utter disaster, but maybe they would have released another one. Hopefully not called the Pip. Apple TV would have had a Halo TV show. Apple Arcade would have likely launched with a Halo iOS game. And most recently, Apple put a ban on Microsoft's xCloud, like their game streaming thing. In this case, we probably would have been streaming Halo to our phones. That is even if xCloud would have existed. What would have Xbox been like in this alternate reality? What would Xbox Live be like? What would first-person shooters be like without this? Now, imagining all of this is arbitrary, I know. But I do think there's value in at least entertaining the what-if scenarios of things that could have been. Halo has had a staggering impact on the culture of games and the identity of many gamers. What would a world have been like if we didn't have that video of a bunch of adolescent boys coming together to sing its soundtrack in a bathroom? That's a world I don't want to live in. And even still, it did eventually come to macOS and PC, and even returned to its roots as an RTS with Halo Wars. Now, will Halo revolutionize games again? That timeline has yet to be written. But one thing's for sure is that its legacy and what it's done to games is surely set in stone. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching this episode of Remember When. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, if you're new here, thanks for coming by as well. We have a bunch of episodes that we've done, some on consoles, one on Resident Evil, another on Street Fighter, and a link to that in the playlist will be in the description below. So yeah, I'm Kurt, Indovina, by the way. Pleasure to meet you if we haven't already been acquainted. And that's really about it. Hope you're doing well, be well, stay safe. Okay. All right. See you later.